Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben.
This is Diego Sanchez, Randy Couture,
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
And we are back. Dennis Gradov here with Kasper Rosalowski. Submission Radio, UFC 237 preview show, episode 186, Wednesday, the 8th of May. Cass, we are back, baby. We just came back from the holidays. And geez, it's good to be back and doing another episode of Submission Radio.
It's good to be back, man. The batteries are recharged. You in New Zealand, me in Thailand. Stories galore. We got sexy guests coming on the program. We'll tell a couple of quick stories in a second. But, dude, we got John Morgan return to the program. We're talking UFC 237. We're previewing fights. We're breaking down fights, the big fights, of course. We've got Aaron Bronsteter of TSN, of course, the sister station to ESPN. We spoke to Aaron Bronsteter. We did a bit of a preview for UFC 229 in October. Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's making his official submission rated debut on the program. I'm excited. He's going to be talking about UFC 237 and some of the other big storylines happening in MMA currently. This ESPN deal, how it's affecting things like Brock Lesnar's return, GSP's return, Conor McGregor's return. Fascinating guy that I want to pick his brain on. Also, Tommy Toehold bringing the laughs, as has become a customary tradition for Submission Radio. You can't have a Submission Radio preview show without Tommy Toehold, and the guy is like a fine wine. He only gets better with age, because anytime he delivers the goods on these preview shows, I'm always laughing my ass off, and I imagine you guys are as well.
Absolutely. What a great episode. And I can imagine a Tommy Toehold bottle of wine. I mean, Tommy, if you're listening, I think this is a new item merchandise idea for you, and hell, Submission Radio could go in it with you, buddy. The Submission Radio Tommy Toehold wine. Let us know in the comment section below if that's a wine you would drink. I feel like that's a wine, you drink when you break up in a relationship, or you drink to celebrate a great event like UFC 237. Now, but before we jump into the preview cast, you mentioned it, we were on holidays. I was in New Zealand, spending time with family over there. Ash's family's down there. Great time. Went around the hills. Saw where they shot Narnia. Just chilled out. Probably the polar opposite of what was happening in Thailand with you. I know you mentioned it. A couple of stories. Hit us with a couple of good ones. Or a couple of crazy things. I know you got recognized over there, which is pretty crazy. Right?
It was arguably a highlight of the trip. So Thailand, at least Phuket, where we were staying, you get very used to people just grabbing you on the street non-stop. Not because they know you from Submission Radio, but because everyone's trying to sell you stuff. You walk down the street, it's, hey brother, you want a suit? Hey brother, you want this? Hey, you want that? Markets over, hey, you want coke? Hey, you want marijuana? You got like massage ladies yelling out. Like, they're like hawks, man. If there's like a 1-inch gap like through the wall, they'll see you and they're all like, hey big boy, hey sexy. You'd be walking down the street, they're like, you want massage? And you're like, no, we're going to dinner. They're like, hey, eat me. Like, they're relentless. Like, got ladyboys yelling out at you. So my point is, like, you get desensitized. You just walk through. It's like the Matrix. You're plugged in and you're just like, these aren't real people. I'm just going to walk through and ignore everyone. Because everyone just wants to sell you stuff. And you walk into a club and, like, pretty much every girl there is a hooker. I kid you not. So, like, you think, oh, man, all these girls want me. But in reality, they're all just, like, working girls. And so I walk into the club. It's the very last night that we're there. We're like, we're going to have a big night before we jump on the plane. And then a guy approaches me, and first thing he says, hey man, are you from Submission Radio? And it was like a sobering moment. Like, I was out of my mind that night. But when he said that, it was like, oh my God, of all the places, this is not an MMA sort of context situation. This isn't like an arena where an event has just finished. And when I heard that, I was like, holy shit. And he was a super, super nice guy. Name's Jackson. I believe he moved to Thailand recently. And I don't think I was very coherent, but we chatted a little bit. I think he asked me who I thought would win between Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya, and he was kind enough to take a photo. And honestly, made my night, man. Really, really good dude.
Yeah, no, some great photos and videos from your trip. I see you got hit with a BB gun, tased, all sorts of fun, crazy things.
Dude, we did ATV. We were like Stone Cold Steve Austin, riding in the mountains, like going up like hills and valleys, like going through the jungle to see the big Buddha. And then a snake fell onto my friend's ATV, and he didn't even realize it was the guy behind him that was like, snake. And the snake actually ended up falling into the chain of the ATV and committed snake suicide, basically. And then, like, the Sherpas who were with us, they had to pull the snake out, and then I held the snake, and it was still moving in my hands. But, like, probably one of the best days ever. Went to PP Islands. We saw where the beach was shot. That was pretty cool. We did snorkeling, scuba diving. I was looking around for Leonardo DiCaprio. He wasn't there. Must have left. It was good. It was a good time. Go-karting at night. It was crazy.
Unbelievable trip. I think I speak for all the Submission Radio fans that we're happy that you survived it and made it back into the program.
Did I really?
In one piece. Well, your soul is still in Thailand, but physically you are here. And that is all we need to do this episode of UFC 237 Preview Show. Just quickly for everybody out there as well, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is where we're at. Jump on. You can message us, DM us, let us know what you think. And, of course, YouTube, leave us your comments underneath. What are your previews for UFC 237? We're curious to know what you think. It's going to be some very interesting fights. Obviously, you'll hear some of the best in the game, preview it, and then let us know your thoughts. I'm wondering who's going to win a cast. A lot of very close matchups.
Dude, there's some sexy matchups. Anderson Silva versus Jarrod Cannonier, finding out where Anderson Silva lies in the division at his current age, and also what Jarrod Cannonier is capable of against a still very high-level striker in Anderson Silva. You got Volkanovski versus Jose Aldo. Can Volkanovski do it for Australia? Can Jose Aldo have his storybook moment in Rio de Janeiro yet again? Jessica Andrade taking on Rose Namajunas. What a fascinating matchup that is. We'll be discussing all these things and more with John Morgan and Aaron Bronsteter and Tommy Tohol bringing the last. But without further ado, our first guest is on the line. It is rude to keep them waiting. And Dennis, I believe you're about to introduce him.
All right, guys, our next guest from his great work with TSN Sports and the TSN MMA show. It's a pleasure to welcome Aaron Bronsteter to Submission Radio for the very first time. What a special moment. Aaron, welcome to the program.
A very special moment indeed. Joyous. I'm very happy to be on the show. I've got my man cave here as well as my children's cave here because my kids' arts and crafts are all on the wall. And, I've got to share my space now, unfortunately, with 3 kids. So I don't get to have the man cave that it used to be. But we'll deal with what we have. We'll work with what we have to work with.
Dude, we love it. We love the background. The colors pop nicely, and it makes us appreciate even more that you're joining us, even though you got kids running around, you got other things to take care of. But hey, we're coming off a big card in Canada just this past weekend. Just tell us, how much of a big deal was this for the locals? The Canadian market at one point kind of got a little bit ignored by the UFC. Did this feel like a sort of big event? We know here in Australia, maybe somewhere in the US, I think it kind of got swept under the rug a little bit.
Well, obviously, if it's in Canada, it's a little bit bigger in Canada. One of 3 cards of the year. This is the smallest of the 3. This is going to be, that one was the ESPN Plus card, and the next one will be either a pay-per-view or an ESPN. So we'll have to see how that plays out as the rest of the year goes on. I've heard a lot of different rumblings about where and when those might be. But, it was a pretty big card in terms of the local market.
Tell us, Cowboy Cerrone pulled off a big win, and possibly his biggest win in a long time, beating Al in the main event. What did you think of his performance?
Well, it was amazing. He kind of explained it best after the fact. He said that he just wasn't feeling this fight for the whole day. He wasn't nervous about it. And then when he realized he wasn't nervous about it, he got nervous about it. He got nervous about the fact that he wasn't nervous about it. And he said that just in the first 2 rounds, he just wasn't feeling it. There was no rhythm. Nothing was clicking. And then, as you saw, those last 3 rounds, even though those first 2 rounds were pretty close, those last 3 rounds are when, things finally clicked for him and he was really going at it in full gear and really putting it on Al. I didn't expect the fight to go that way. I didn't think it was going to be that lopsided. And, Al won't quit. Al stayed in there the whole time, but it was clearly Cowboy's fight.
I think a lot of people were kind of surprised by this resurgence. Cowboy sort of getting a little bit older, having some key losses. For him to sort of keep coming back, I think it surprised a lot of people in a really good way. I'm curious what you thought of Al's strategy here, sort of, staying in Cowboy's range for the most part. He wasn't able to mix in, too many takedowns, not a ton of head movement. What did you think of Al's performance?
Well, Al's range is very similar to Cowboy's range. That seems to be where he does best. Unfortunately, I just think Cowboy had too many weapons for him to be able to deal with. And there was something off about his performance. I don't know what it was. He seemed like he was doing great all week. His weight cut was really easy. He was staying relaxed. I don't know what exactly it was about Al's performance that was off, but something was off about it. I think we saw, what Al's made of. Al can go 5 rounds with just about anybody. And I think that it's just something was off about Al for some reason. And I think Cowboy was able to capitalize on that. Actually, it seemed like something was off with both those guys early on in the fight. And Cowboy just seemed to get that rhythm.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, the rhythm. It just seemed like Al could never find it in this fight. Anytime he got sort of a bit of success, he couldn't really keep sort of capitalizing on it again and again. And just seemed a little bit lost there. And I think I was also surprised a little bit, and with all due respect, by the fact that Cowboy Cerrone was able to take that many punches and go through and keep fighting. I think we've seen him sort of get caught before, especially after a tough weight cut. What do you say this win for Cerrone does in terms of your thoughts about how far he can really go in this division after you saw him beating a super tough guy like Al?
Well, Cowboy's done it all in his career, except for win a championship. And for the first time ever in Ottawa, he wins a fight that goes into the championship round. So that's huge. That's very big, because that's always been a question mark. Is can he get into deep water? Can, as the fight goes on, is he going to get better? Is he going to get worse? And every time he's gone into the championship rounds, he's never had a chance to win. It hasn't been that many times. I think it's been 3 in his career. Once was Ben Henderson. Once was RDA. And there was one other one that I think got into the championship rounds that he didn't win. It was Jamie Varner. That was the 5-round fight in WEC. So I think it was Varner, Ben Henderson, RDA were the 5-round fights that he's had. I can't remember when RDA stopped him, but I think it was in like the 4th round or something along those lines. But this is a big notch on Cowboy's belt that already has lots of notches on it from his 41 Zuffa appearances. This is the first time he's been able to get to the championship rounds and get it done, a 5-round decision. And I said to him, you got to start somewhere. If your next goal is to win the championship, which is what he suddenly is talking about being on his bucket list in combat sports, winning a 5-round fight is a very good confidence booster in that regard.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess in terms of what's next, whether it's the title or whether it's potentially this money fight against McGregor, we know that Justin Gaethje's name was sort of tossed around there. Do you see possibly this Conor McGregor, Donald Cerrone fight being, brought up again? Maybe the UFC trying to make that fight. And I guess who would you rather see between Donald Cerrone and Justin Gaethje? If you're the UFC, if you're trying to matchmake in a sort of ideal world and have a good trajectory, what do you prefer, Aaron?
Do you mean for Conor as an opponent?
Sure, yeah.
I think you do Diaz. Like, if I'm the UFC, every Conor opportunity that you have needs to be focused on capital and maximizing his returns. And I think that the Diaz trilogy fight is the one that makes the most sense from both a meritocracy and a capital perspective. If you take him and you put him against Khabib again, it doesn't make any sense. You've got Poirier as the interim champion. If you put him against Cowboy, still a big fight, but is it bigger than a Diaz trilogy fight? Probably not. Now, that being said, if you're the UFC and you go to Nate Diaz and he says, I want $9 million to fight Conor, and you go to Cowboy and he says, I'll do it for $1 million, you may as well just go with Cowboy and cut you're probably going to make that on the return in terms of your investment. So I think the ball would be in Nate's court, in the UFC's court, if they went to Nate and said, listen, we're either going to give this fight to Cerrone or we're going to give it to you. What do you want? And I think that they like being in that kind of situation of leverage. They don't really have any leverage in terms of bringing Conor back, but they have leverage in terms of an opponent. And you know what? I saw that there was a poll. Would you like to see Cowboy Cerrone fight Conor? And it was like 86% yes. Of course it's yes. Would you like to see Conor face Tony Ferguson? Yes. Would you like to see him face Justin Gaethje? Yes. Would you like to see him face Casper's neighbor? Yes. Anybody. People just want to see Conor come back.
Yeah, Steve, you better
Your neighbor
watch
better
out.
get in the gym.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when you look at Conor's potential return opponents, there's no real easy matchups. Like Tony Ferguson, Khabib, Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje. These are all guys who are really... I wouldn't necessarily favor Conor against any of them. And Cerrone, for me, kind of seems like, and again, with all due respect, that seems like a winnable fight for Conor. And even then, not necessarily. So I guess if in your mind you want to do, say, Conor versus Nate, who would you see next for Donald Cerrone here? Who would you match him up against?
You just got to look through the division. I think Gaethje's an interesting one. Perhaps a rematch with Pettis would be an interesting one. I think there are a lot of different things that you could set up for Cerrone. But I don't know if that's what Cerrone wants. I think Cerrone's looking up now. I think Cerrone versus Ferguson would be a lot of fun also.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned Ferguson because we saw he had a meeting with the UFC this week under his new management. What do you think this sort of means? How soon do you think it is until we sort of see him back in the fold? And at this point, are you thinking it's possible that he'll be getting a fight like Cerrone? Or do you think this is a guy that might even, I suppose, sit out and see what happens with this whole Khabib situation?
I'm thinking July or August. I don't think that there's a lot of value for him sitting out. It seems like he hasn't been super active anyways. He had that one fight with Pettis. But I don't think sitting out is in the best interest of Tony Ferguson because the division's going to keep moving. And this is a division of sharks. And people keep making names for themselves. All Gaethje needs, I think, is one more win to really cement himself as a contender. So I think that Ferguson's best interest is to take a fight in the end of July or August and or even September in Abu Dhabi be on the same card as Khabib and Poirier as a backup. That might be a very smart move from a strategic standpoint. Those are the kind of things that we have to look at for Tony Ferguson.
And it's interesting as well with Ferguson, because it's like if you match him up with Gaethje, now you're getting rid of two contenders in one fight. And I mean, Gaethje would be amazing to watch against a guy like Khabib. You know, Tony would be amazing to watch against a guy like Khabib. So that's where maybe a Donald Cerrone fight comes in, where you make some money and it's exciting and you keep the excitement of a possible Tony title fight or Justin Gaethje title fight. But just quickly, Aaron, while we're talking about Conor McGregor, normally Conor is all over Twitter when it comes to a fight that kind of relates to him in any kind of way, in any kind of situation. We surprised at the radio silence on his Twitter account after this latest Donald Cerrone win. It didn't seem like he said anything about the win at all. And that's not really Conor McGregor like. Lately, he's just been blowing up his social media feeds whenever there's a possible fight for him.
Yeah, I kept checking his Twitter feed to see if he was going to say anything or respond to Cerrone, because whenever he hears his name, usually he responds immediately. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if we should read into that maybe he's in negotiations or something, or maybe there's already a prospective opponent. But I think that would be a little bit hasty. I think that we might not see Conor for a while. I mean, this is the one really important thing to keep in mind right now with the UFC. If reports are true about the fact that ESPN Plus is giving them 500,000 pay-per-view buys on it, I mean, the equivalent of 500,000 pay-per-view buys for every pay-per-view, which has been reported by some outlets. If that's the case, what's the incentive for a lot of these superstars to come back? Like, what's the incentive for a McGregor to come back, or a GSP or a Lesnar, any of those big names that would be getting points when there's not really a system in place right now that benefits them promoting the fights? The onus on promoting the fights right now seems to be on ESPN. So if that's the case, what's going to get these guys into the octagon? I mean, it's going to have to basically be a big flat fee. And we saw according to Dave Meltzer's report, that they weren't willing to pony up the money for Brock Lesnar. And Lesnar's on the right track. Like, if you want me to come and fight in your promotion and be a face and be a superstar where you don't have a lot of them right now, I want to be compensated fairly, whether that's 7 figures or whatever it is. Because right now with this new pay-per-view model, I'm not exactly sure how much money I'm going to be making. It's not something that you can really audit. So the pay-per-view points situation, I think, is an ongoing and developing story, because if fighters are no longer getting the same kind of points compensation as they were, or it's different or less or whatever, we're going to have to see whether these superstars are going to be willing to come back to the UFC. Because if the UFC doesn't have any incentive to get 2 million buys, because they're going to be getting 500,000 buys or that equivalent from ESPN Plus or ESPN, then what's the incentive for them to be bringing these superstars back if ESPN's going to be making the money and not them? So that's something to consider. There's going to be a finite price for all of these guys.
It's fascinating that you bring this up, because absolutely it changes the game. And Brock Lesnar, and you mentioned it, I mean, he had the perfect case to set a precedent where the UFC's like, look, this is how much everybody gets, but Brock Lesnar, you know, we're going to pay him this much more because, you know, this could be possibly his last fight, is going to draw us a lot more. But I guess with the negotiations with Conor McGregor at the moment, they didn't want to sort of shoot themselves in the foot and, I suppose, let him use Brock Lesnar as a case study for him getting more money. Ultimately, though, we missed out on Brock Lesnar making his comeback, which, you know, a lot of fans weren't a big fan of him coming back and fighting DC. But I think, you know, you get a very small time window with a guy like Brock Lesnar who's getting very old. And, you know, maybe the UFC misses out on ever having Brock Lesnar back in the UFC again. And also, you know, we've talked about GSP versus Khabib, and we know GSP's retired. But do you think this whole ESPN deal could also sort of take away the possibility of even like a GSP coming back and fighting a Khabib? You know, all the massive fights. Do you think it could mean that we'll be missing out on all these kinds of big opportunities for fans?
Well, I think Conor is the one to look for. I think, you know, there's a shot that maybe we don't see Conor come back, because right now neither side has leverage. Neither side has any sort of negotiating power. If Conor says, I want $15 million or whatever, $30 million, whatever the number is, and the UFC says, well, we're only going to be getting $500,000 buys rather worth of money back from whatever the pay-per-view is, nobody has any incentive to come back. They're not going to incentivize Conor to come back because they don't make anything else off of it, unless there's some sort of bonus structure in place where if they sell a certain amount of pay-per-views that ESPN gives them a little bit off the top. And then for McGregor, if that's the case and he's not going to be getting points on it, what's his sort of leverage and what's his incentive to promote these things? What's his incentive to go out and do media for them? It's really, really an interesting time right now for the UFC. And I think that in about a year's time, we'll be able to fully grasp what has happened here, because we're only entering the second pay-per-view. I mean, in this ESPN era. So I think time's going to tell as to how much leverage these superstars have and how much the UFC are willing to pony up to bring these people back. Because until there's some sort of pressure from their partner where ESPN says, listen, you said you were going to deliver here. We're averaging 110,000 buys and we're paying you for 500,000 buys. That's when things are going to get interesting, because if they go back to the UFC and say, listen, we want to see some performances here. We want to see some numbers that are going to deliver on what we thought we were getting into. That's where I think we're going to have to start seeing more superstars come back. And that might not happen for another year or so.
I think you hit the nail on the head, because, not that long ago, there were pay-per-views that people were almost laughing at in terms of how low the pay-per-view buys would be, around the 100,000, 200,000 mark. And then you'd get these massive spikes with a GSP, with, a Brock Lesnar, with a Conor McGregor. And if you're not getting those, I can certainly see a situation where ESPN, like you mentioned, said, hey, man, we need some draws, because, people aren't necessarily subscribing, people aren't necessarily buying the pay-per-views. But I was going to say, just on GSP, with Khabib once again kind of throwing that lure out, do you think that does anything else for GSP? Do you think it in any way opens the possibility for his return? Or do you think it all kind of hinges on this ESPN deal and the money that it comes down to?
I don't think the money is a massive factor for GSP. I know it is a factor, but for him, legacy seems to be what he's after. And if Khabib runs through Dustin and then runs through whoever his subsequent opponent is and calls out GSP, and GSP calls the UFC and says, listen, I'm willing to do this. Let's go 155. I'll contend for the title. Let's make this happen. Then maybe it happens. But GSP right now retired on the premise that he's not going to be getting a shot at Khabib. So if that shot for Khabib comes up, he also said at his retirement press conference that maybe one day he'll be on a fishing boat and he'll get a call and need to spring into action like a superhero and save the day. So I think there's always the possibility of George St. Pierre coming back if A, the price is right, and B, it's the absolute perfect fit of an opponent. And I know Ben Askren called out GSP again recently too. So we'll have to see where George's head's at in about a year's time.
It's just fascinating because you got GSP who's getting old, you got Brock Lesnar who's already old, and those are two of the biggest sort of draws, and they'll be out of the picture in a few years' time. So it just feels like some people are going to have regrets if things don't come together like they should. All right, we're talking about UFC 237 on this program, and as we wrap up with you, Aaron, I want to get some predictions from you. The first fight I want to talk to you about is Jose Aldo versus Alex Volkanovski, our own guy from down here in Australia. It's a big fight for Volkanovski. A lot of people excited from Australia to see how he goes. But, of course, Aldo is a legend. He's been looking really good lately. There has been some rumors around if he's going to be 100%. What's he going to be like on fight night? What's your prediction for this one?
Well, 3-round Aldo has been a killer. But at the same time, I was really, really impressed with what Volkanovski did to Chad Mendes. I thought that was a really spectacular performance from him. And if the stories about Aldo and his condition are true, it seems like he's barely been in the gym and that he's only been able to train a couple times a week. If that's the case, you got to give it to the guy with the full camp that's coming off a massive win in Volkanovski. And I think that if Volkanovski wins, you have to put him next in line for a featherweight title shot, because I know Edgar's name has been coming up as the next guy in line, but if Volkanovski comes off of back-to-back wins against Chad Mendes and Jose Aldo, I mean, he'd be the only one to beat Aldo, I think, ever over the course of a 3-round fight, if I'm not mistaken. Aside from, I think in his debut, he lost his very first fight, something like that. But in terms of his time in Zuffa, I think that would be the only person to beat Aldo in 3 rounds, and I think that makes a big deal. That makes a big difference. So I think that I would lean Volkanovski in this spot. If Aldo was coming in at full health, we hadn't heard all these reports, I probably would lean Aldo. But I think in this situation, if there's any truth to what Aldo's apparently been going through, you got to lean with the healthier fighter.
And you got to think, if the reports are true and you're Jose Aldo and you're coming towards the end of your career, why would you even go through with this fight if you're really that badly banged up? And, this is clearly a guy who's trying to make a name off you. Why wouldn't you just, withdraw, live to fight another day? So I'm very curious what kind of condition Jose Aldo's in.
It's because of his contract. He says he wants to fight out the rest of his contract by the end of the year. I think he had 3 fights left this year, and he wants to get all 3 of them done by the end of the year. So that's kind of his incentive. But, right now, after Adesanya's win, Behrman's camp is probably the energy there must be massive, and I think that's going to help Volkanovski a lot.
100%. What do you think about Anderson Silva versus Jarrod Cannonier? I feel like this is kind of a measuring stick for Anderson Silva and where he lies kind of these days, and A win for Jarrod Cannonier over Anderson Silva would be massive, even the Anderson Silva of today.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one because this is definitely the lowest level opponent that Anderson Silva's had in a long, long time in terms of name value. I mean, Cannonier came in. He who was it, David Branch that he beat when he came in on to 185 for his debut?
Yeah, UFC
whoever
230.
it was. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So he's got a lot of momentum right now, and a lot of people think that at 185, Cannonier is going to be a factor. But at the same time, we haven't seen too much from him at 185. So this is Aldo's. I mean, this is such a big opportunity for Aldo to do this in Brazil. Like, he hasn't fought in Brazil in a long, long time. And I think that we're going to see what Anderson Silva still has left this weekend. I would have to lean Cannonier for over the course of 3 rounds just because he's the younger guy. Looks like he's really going to be a force at 185. And Anderson Silva, we kind of know what we're getting from him at this point, and it just isn't a whole lot. I mean, since he lost the title to Weidman, I mean, his record is just abysmal. I know he's been fighting really tough guys, and even his win over Brunson is very questionable. That was a decision that really could have gone either way. So I think that Anderson Silva's best days are clearly behind him, but you never know what this crowd is going to do to galvanize him and really make him have the incentive to get a very impressive victory. So we'll have to see how that one goes. But if he loses to Cannonier, he might call it a day.
It's interesting as well because Silva's coming off a fight with Adesanya not too long ago. I wonder how much that helps him sort of not have the cage rust and also have a fight against someone who was really, really tough in his last fight. Not a fight that he won, but still he was able to move around and sort of get a few looks. All right, let's talk about the main event, Rose versus Andrade. She's going to enemy territory here. Aaron, do you think the title switches hands or is she able to defend?
I've been so back and forth on this one. Like, I know that Andrade has what it takes to get it done, but Rose is such a cerebral fighter that it makes me wonder what Andrade is going to be able to do to get her out of there. I mean, we know what she can do, but would she be able to do that against Rose? I mean, think of what Rose did to Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who might be the best technical striker that we've seen in women's MMA. And she was able to dispatch her twice. I mean, that was obviously that first time where Joanna had that terrible weight cut. And then the second time where she just won 5 rounds. I mean, she won, I think, 3 or 4 out of the 5 rounds on the judges' scorecards. She got outstruck in terms of volume, but it looked like it was clearly her fight. Now she has to go against Andrade, who is going to just really be moving forward for 5 rounds. But I think that Rose's diversity might be the X factor here. I have a lot of trouble making a pick on this one because I was thinking for a long time I was on Team Andrade in terms of who I thought was going to win. I mean, I'm not on her team or anything. I don't really support fighters from that perspective. But I thought that she was going to be just the bigger, well, not taller, but the stronger fighter with much more striking power, and she'd be able to knock Rose down, and maybe just be able to beat her with power. But just when I look at the diversity of Rose's game and how much she's improving, keep in mind she's still very young. So every camp she's going to be improving exponentially. So I just think that Rose has more tools to get it done. But I have a lot of problems making a pick because sometimes there's the fighter that has more tools and there's the fighter that has the better tool, and it's one of those situations.
And then you got the fighter who has Pat Barry in their corner and the smooches from Pat Barry, before Rose gets in the cage. I think that's an X factor all in of its own. But Aaron, we could chat to you all day, man. Really, really appreciate your time. Guys, make sure to tune into the TSN MMA show and follow Aaron on Twitter at Aaron Bronsteter. Aaron, man, we'll definitely be doing it again soon. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thrilled to do it. Happy that we were able to get the debut of Aaron Bronsteter on Submission Radio. I'm a big fan.
That's it, man. On to the next one. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the fights.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, this is Tony Okagui Ferguson, and you guys listen to Submission Radio. Keep tuning in, guys.
What's up, fight fans? I'm the in-game spoilers of mixed martial arts, Tommy Toehold, and the UFC is heading back to Rio to celebrate 2 of its biggest Brazilian stars ever in fights that will probably end with both of them being knocked unconscious in devastating fashion. UFC 237 is this weekend, which means it's time for me to tell you 4 reasons you need to be hyped up for this card. Reason number 1, Thug Rose! We have not seen Thug Rose Namajunas since her back-to-back beatdowns of Joanna Violence, but after over a year layoff, the most exciting strawweight in the world is finally returning, and she's doing so in the craziest fucking way possible. impossible. You beat Joanna Champion twice to prove you're the baddest fucking 115-pounder this side of a fucking mountain lion, and instead of taking it easy and fighting somewhere near home, you're gonna go into Brazil in the main event on a card that two of the country's biggest heroes are on to fight walking Brazilian tank Jessica Andrade. If Rose pulls this shit off, if she walks into Rio in the main event, 18,000 Brazilians chanting "You will die" in Portuguese, and subs or KOs the strawweight division's version of the Juggernaut, I mean, just put her in the Hall of Fame because it doesn't get much more badass than that. The prospect of that happening alone makes UFC 237 worth your time, but I can see you're someone who isn't easily impressed, so let's add some more reasons. How about Anderson fucking Silva, guys? I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Anderson Silva's 44 years old, and he probably doesn't have that many fights left in him. One of your favorite fighters ever might be on his last unbroken leg. This could very well be a farewell performance by the Spider, and he's gonna get to do it in his home country. Now, does Anderson want to fight still? Yes, of course he does. He would probably fight for another 10 years if you let him. Shit, last year he was talking about fighting Conor McGregor and shit like that. Well, Jarrod Cannonier might have some say in the longevity of the greatest middleweight of all time. Jarrod Cannonier, I know that name. Isn't he a heavyweight? Not anymore. He was a heavyweight, and now he's a middleweight that looks like a fucking comic book superhero, and he won his debut in the division with a TKO over David Branch. He's gonna be looking to take Anderson's head off and absolutely ruin what could be a really special night in Brazil. So no matter how this one goes down, you gotta admit that's some pretty compelling shit. Will Anderson have one last spark of greatness, or will Cannonier just fucking wreck him in Rio? I seriously can't fucking wait. Someone build a time machine so I can see it right now. Speaking of Rio, the King of Rio is also fighting on this card. You wanna know how stacked up UFC 237 is? Jose Aldo, the greatest featherweight of all time, is in the fucking feature bout, and they're in Brazil. Aldo had a rough run from 2015 to 2017, but after a flash KO by Conor and two of the most devastating beatdowns I've ever seen by Max Holloway, one that was also in Rio, Aldo's been surging back to the top, looking like a fucking prime Jason Voorhees. He TKO'd Jeremy Stevens, he TKO'd Renato Moicano, and now he returns to Rio to take on a fucking monster in Alexander Volkanovski. There are no breaks at 145, and Aldo wouldn't want one. He wants to slay a beast in front of the Rio crowd, and that's exactly what he's got coming at him. Volkanovski hasn't lost since Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball was a fucking hit song, and he just TKO'd Chad Mendes right before the new year. There are title implications in this fight. How in the fucking fuck are you still not sold on UFC 237? All right, fine, time for some odds and ends then. Lil Nog, remember him? He still exists, and he's headlining the ESPN prelims against a guy who doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. That should be a special moment when he wins in front of the Rio crowd and then hopefully retires. Speaking of hopefully retiring, BJ Penn is also on the prelims, and he's fighting Clay Guida. That's the type of matchmaking that makes me think the UFC's trying to send a message to Penn. And the message is you must stop. Not gonna lie, that one's gonna be a bloodbath. Iago Alves is on the card. Betchko Hare returns after 2 years off. She was always fun. Trinaldo versus Fajeda. It's gonna be a hot night in Rio, and there should be some fantastic and horribly sad moments. Seriously, what more do you want from MMA? That's all I got. If you're not hyped for 227 now, then you clearly just hate fun. Thank you guys for having me on the show yet again. It's always an honor. Take it away, you two.
This is Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is the man in blue. You, of course, know him from his excellent work at MMAJunkie.com, kicking off every UFC press conference and the uncanny ability to always be equipped with a cold, frosty beverage. He is the Stone Cold Steve Austin of MMA. Give me a hell yeah. And he'll actually be calling the fights at Cage Fury Fighting Championships on May 25th alongside CM Punk and Jessica I, if you can believe that. John Morgan himself, welcome back to Submission Radio. How are you today, man?
I'm good, man. I'll clarify. It is Jessica Penne. Jessica I is focused on her championship fight right now.
I am an idiot.
She's getting out doing any commentating. But no worries, man. No. I'm excited. I appreciate you mentioning that, man. I'm actually really excited to kind of get back into the commentating world. It's something I really enjoy doing. I hadn't done for a couple of years, and I'm excited about it, man.
It's great, man. You'll be calling the fights in UFC Fight Pass, and this is sort of explain to us, is this a one-shot deal, or are you going to be calling multiple shows here?
Yeah, we're kind of figuring that out right now. CFFC, for people that are outside the United States might not know, it's a company that's been around for a long time, but it was based on the East Coast, out in New Jersey. Of course, I'm here in Vegas, but they're coming out to California. They're starting to travel around a little bit. They're kind of ramping up a little bit. They kind of want to be one of these developmental leagues, kind of a primary destination to get people to that next level and get into the UFC. And so they're going to travel around a little bit. And by doing so, it kind of opens up some opportunities. I think they still have some local crew that they're going to use back in Jersey. But for this show, we're giving it a shot, and hopefully there'll be more things in the future.
Dude, I hope so, because you've done a great job with commentary in the past. But this is going to be fascinating seeing you, obviously, and seeing Punk calling the action, and Jessica Penne, as I just learned. Why do you think he was chosen to be on the broadcast? I'm interested about that, and what are you expecting from him for CFFC?
Well, look, he's actually already done a couple shows for CFFC, so those are on Fight Pass. You want to check out, and he's done a good job, man. The guy goes in there, he does his homework. He knows the sport. I mean, I know people take shots at him for his fighting ability, but I didn't know anything about CM Punk before he joined the UFC, and I've never seen a wrestling match of his. I don't know anything about him from that aspect of his world, but I can tell you that every time I've ever been around him, the guy is buttoned up, man. He's a professional. He's dedicated. He works hard, and I'm excited to work with him. I really am. He always struck me as a great guy, man. I understand why people take shots at him, and why did he get to the UFC when maybe he didn't deserve it, and there were other fighters that maybe deserve it. But I always thought his attitude was great about it. He just said, "Listen, I'm not saying I'm going to be the greatest ever, but I love the sport, and this is a dream of mine. And the fact that I have some popularity and some star power means that UFC President Dana White, they're giving me the opportunity to do this. And if somebody tells you you can fight in the UFC and fulfill your dream, who would turn that down?" So I'm excited. I'm excited to get together and work with them.
Yeah, I think he hit the nail on the head there. I mean, obviously, maybe he's not a pound-for-pound fighter, but this is a guy that could be doing a billion and one things, especially if you want to make a lot of money. And here he is. You can see his passion for MMA. He's putting in the work and really doing it as a passion project. So it's great to see you guys doing it all together. And I wonder if he'll be grabbing a beer with the great John Morgan after the thing. We'll have to find that out later. But look, let's look at UFC 237. And let's start off with Anderson Silva versus Jarrod Cannonier. We were all there. We all laughed in Melbourne when Israel Adesanya suggested this matchup for Silva. But wow, now here we are, and he's probably laughing at us. Ultimately, do you think the UFC made the right fight here? Is it safe to assume the UFC are sort of using Silva to build rising contenders, or do they believe that this could be a fight that Silva could win in Brazil?
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, Israel Adesanya is the man that you got to pick his head to find all that out. He has his finger on the matchmaking pulse, man. That was a great story, man. Adesanya suggested this fight, and we all kind of cracked up and said it's not going to happen, and then it happened. So bizarre. Listen, to me, it was a little bit out of left field, and that's why I think I laughed at it. And no disrespect to Jarrod Cannonier or Anderson Silva for that matter, but yeah, it's that question right there. What is the UFC trying to accomplish with Anderson Silva, especially fighting in Brazil? I mean, Jarrod Cannonier, a guy that came to the UFC as a heavyweight, man, and then he makes it down to light heavyweight, and I remember him saying, I can do middleweight, and we all just thought, man, are you serious? And then he came out and just looked like an absolute monster at 185 pounds, man. He is a scary dude, so, I don't think this is any kind of a gimme fight or a setup for Anderson Silva, even though he's fighting in Brazil. I'm picking Cannonier in this fight, so it is a little bit of a head scratcher for me. I mean, the Brazilian audience, of course, man, this is the return of Anderson Silva for the first time, I believe, since the Bonner fight that he fought in Rio. I mean, to be fighting in Brazil. So, I think they'd love to have that, welcome this grand champion home. But I think this is a tough test for him.
And just a funny Cannonier story. I remember UFC 230. I mean, like you said, he was moving down, doing the whole middleweight thing, and he had a new look. Like, he had a different hairstyle, and his facial hair looked a lot different. And I think when people thought of Cannonier, they thought of like the old school one with the shaved head, and he was a bit big. Man, I mean, and I'm honest when I say this, like 90% of the media didn't even know that was Cannonier until it hit media day, and he sat down and I mean, you look at the guy on Instagram, like, this is not like a superstar kind of guy. Like, he's new to Instagram. He doesn't post too much. He's just like a nice, normal guy. What do you think Fight Week will be like for a guy like Cannonier, who kind of keeps to himself, media didn't even know he was on this card until he stepped into media day at UFC 230, and now he's fighting a legend like Anderson Silva. What do you think that does to him?
I think, he's a guy that's not going to get overwhelmed by the moment. I mean, obviously he's got the military background. He was, working in the FAA. I mean, he's been working in kind of high-pressure situations, and I don't think that the enormity of the moment's going to get to him. The other thing that I really like as well is John Crouch in his corner, man. John Crouch has seen everything and just has such a great understanding of everything that's in there. And I was actually watching the countdown this morning and watched them, and I thought, man, that's dead on. They talked about preparing for the way Anderson fights, understanding that, look, he's going to try to make you seem silly. He's going to try to make you miss and feel dumb, and then he's going to capitalize on that, and you have to be so patient. I almost think about like Derek Brunson the other day with Elias Theodore. I mean, yes, it wasn't the greatest fight of all time, but he fought the fight that he had to fight to deal with a very awkward opponent. And not that Anderson and Elias are doing the same things, but there are fighters that do things different than most people. And I think Jarrod Cannonier is going to be prepared for that. And that's why, to me, I think this moment is, a tough one for Anderson. It's not just the athlete that's on the other side of the cage, which is a physical specimen. As you said, man, just looks completely different at 185 pounds. But I think he's going to be mentally ready for the challenge as well. So, listen, Anderson is capable of doing amazing things even at his advanced age. But this is a tough one.
I was watching the David Branch fight last night, actually, in preparation for this, and I still feel like Cannonier he's athletically an absolute monster, but he's kind of a little bit raw. So I do feel like Anderson Silva has the opportunity to sort of take advantage. He has the skills. It's just whether he has the physical tools still to sort of, get the job done. What do you think it says about Anderson Silva if he does lose to Jarrod Cannonier? I mean, we had Aaron Bronsteter on the show just before, and he did say that this is easily Anderson's lowest profile opponent in a very, very long time. But it just doesn't seem like Anderson Silva is going to be retiring anytime soon.
I would agree with that assessment. I'd agree with your assessment as well, too. I mean, that's the thing, such veteran savvy, you know what I mean? And the mental strength that Anderson has and the traps that he can set and the intelligence that he has the ability to do this. It's just, as you said, as if the physical tools are still there. But yeah, I mean, I think a loss here would be devastating. I just don't think that a loss here means the end of his career, especially fighting in Brazil. I mean, this guy is on a different level. I mean, I think people around the world understand what a star Anderson Silva was. I mean, that's why it is so special when Anderson, travels to Australia or travels somewhere else, to fight, because people are like, wow, that's Anderson Silva. And I think you can still get those. I mean, there's still emerging territories that you could put them on a card and say, look, man, that's Anderson Silva right there. And in Brazil, it's unbelievable. I mean, him and Nogueira, and of course Vitor as well, to a little bit lesser extent, but Anderson and Nogueira especially, they're on a totally different plane. So, do I think that this could be the end of meaningful fights? Yeah, I mean, it could be. I don't think that Anderson is going to be in championship contention, especially, man, the top of that division is nasty right now. But yeah, it is. I don't think it's, we're looking at, hey, this could be his last fight. But it is going to have a big impact on how meaningful those fights are moving forward.
And I wonder with this ESPN deal, with them sort of wanting as many stars on these pay-per-views as possible, if Anderson Silva is one of these guys that they're hoping sort of gets people buying those pay-per-views. Quickly, before we talk about Aldo and Volkanovski, we have to mention BJ Penn, because he returns once again and faces Clay Guida. Now, aside from his decline in the cage, BJ has been surrounded by a lot of controversy lately, between the restraining order filed by his wife to the active investigation of him threatening a farmer with a machete. Why do you think the UFC even allowed this fight to go ahead? Do you think they should have, or they might have thought about pulling Penn from this one?
I mean, I think the UFC, especially when you talk about Dana White and the old guard, I mean, they feel very much a sense of loyalty to BJ Penn. I mean, that's a relationship that's long-standing, and there's a lot of respect there, is it the right decision? I don't know. I mean, I kind of wish I was going to be in Rio just to have that opportunity to ask him and look him face to face and ask him, like, why are you doing this? I mean, I get it, man. It is hard to walk away from that spotlight, man. The feeling, the feeling of an arena as a journalist on fight night is fun. You know what I mean? But to be the center of all that and to think about that adrenaline and what it brings to you and the glory of that and testing yourself. And, there's been, if you read between the lines of some of those police reports and stuff, there's a lot of talk about, and it's not anything that people haven't heard before, but that BJ needs that focus in his life to stay sober and to stay on the straight and narrow, to have the truth of a fight coming. That's what it takes for him to stay focused and to stay clean. And so, I think there's a sense of loyalty with the UFC. Do I think it's necessarily the best idea? I don't know, man. I was, you get around BJ and it's crazy. I remember the Yair Rodriguez fight. I mean, they announced that and it's just like, oh my God, what are we doing here? And then you get around BJ and you're like, this guy's feeling it this week, man. He's here.
Contagious.
He's back, He's just so infectious, man. It gets you believing it, So, we'll see. I hope he has a good performance. This is not an easy fight for him. I know it's another veteran. Fortunately, it's not a 23-year-old kid or anything like that. But, this is a tough fight. And, I hope BJ's doing it for the right reasons. And
Clay Guida has been fighting pretty decently lately. Who are you picking in this fight? I know, like, with Clay Guida, kind of like with Ryan Hall, kind of like with some of the other options, like, he's not the most devastating fighter, like with Yair Rodriguez and Frankie Edgar. Like, those were just tough to watch. But Guida's still fighting at a decent level. Do you think BJ can get it done, or do you think this is going to be another tough one to watch?
Yeah, I'm picking Guida in this. And it was funny you mentioned that because, like you said, Ryan Hall, I don't love the idea of BJ still fighting, but I understand that he's a man that can do what he wants to do, and he's paid his dues in the sport and deserves that respect. I like the Ryan Hall matchup because you knew there wasn't really a chance to come out and just clock him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Clay Guida is going to come out and one punch stop him either. But he could get on top of him and he could grind him out and he could keep a pace. Maybe he doesn't take it to the ground. Maybe he stays on the feet and peppers and moves. It could be tough to watch. I think we'd all love to see, and not cheering against Clay Guida because he's a great guy, man. Clay Guida's been around forever and he deserves respect. But I think we just all love to see something good from BJ Penn. But I have to lean towards Clay Guida.
I just love how this fight is like hidden away on a card in Brazil in 2019, and this would have been the main event like 10 years ago, even longer ago. So the crazy times. All the carpenters in Brazil will make their way out for that one.
I will say this though, it is an interesting thing about we're kind of feeling this whole TV deal out in the U.S. now, but the way this is going to air in the U.S. is that the first fights will be on ESPN Plus. Guida and BJ Penn will kick off the ESPN portion. So that's the one that's on, basic cable. Everybody has ESPN. Pretty much everybody has ESPN. I mean, who doesn't have cable? But, it's interesting to think. I mean, that section, I don't know what these pay-per-view sales are right now. Nobody does. I mean, so that section could get quite a few eyeballs on it.
I think you're right. I think a lot more people probably see that fight than the pay-per-view. I mean, who are we kidding? It's a decent pay-per-view, but it's not amazing by any means. Let's talk about this Aldo Volkanovski fight. Aldo's had success. He's won some fights beating such tough guys as Stevens. But look, it looks like there's a bit of a changing of the guard. Volkanovski's on a 15-fight win streak. A lot of those fights that he's won in the UFC hasn't even been 100%. Here we're hearing that Aldo is having health problems going into this fight. Do you think he's got the skills to give Aldo problems, especially in a 3-round fight?
I really do. I've been super high on Volkanovski since he came to the UFC. He has impressed me not only with his fighting abilities, but just the whole package about him, his mental attitude, the way his jovial nature in interviews. I mean, I just love everything about Alexander Volkanovski, and I think he wins this fight. I really do. I think that Aldo, if you look at the last 2 fights, which is what everybody's keen on, he's had some great results. But he's shown some deficiencies there as well. It hasn't like he's just been completely dominant either. And I do feel like Volkanovski is kind of that new generation. Now, Aldo's takedown defense has always been impeccable. And Aldo in Brazil, it's like on another level, man. I'm telling you, the feelings of Jose Aldo walking to the cage in Rio, it is something special, man. He is a man of the people there. He is so beloved. And yes, I know that's just an intangible. We're talking about crowd noise, but man, when you talk about getting that little shot of adrenaline, that little something extra that you're going to need, Aldo's going to have that readily available in this fight. And I think Aldo is still competing at a high level. It's not like I don't look at Aldo and say, oh man, if only you could have seen the old Aldo, that guy could fight. You know what I mean? Like, no, Aldo's still competing at a high level. I just do believe that Volkanovski is ready for this test. I do believe he is kind of that next generation, and could be wrong here, but I do believe this is his big coming out party. If people aren't riding the Volkanovski bandwagon already, I think this is the moment they do it.
I think there's definitely some people on that train, on that bandwagon by now, and I feel like Aldo, it's almost like going Super Saiyan for him when he fights in Rio. I feel like it's almost an unfair advantage. But I was going to say, if you had to break it down, what do you think Volkanovski's path to victory is here? Because I was looking at this matchup. You mentioned the takedown defense of Aldo, and Volkanovski does arguably some of his best work on the ground. If he can't get it down there to the ground, do you think he has a shot at sort of, beating Aldo on the feet? Because we saw, obviously, he looked incredible against Chad Mendes, a guy that, Aldo had some problems with and had some back and forths in the second fight.
I think he can have success. I mean, I think the whole key is that he's always got to be moving forward. I mean, the takedown defense, I think he'll get a takedown or two. I think the other big key is that this is a 15-minute fight, not a 25-minute fight. So I think he's got to be relentless with his pace, and I think he's got to be moving forward at all times. If you miss a takedown, you got to reshoot, and if he stops that one, you got to reshoot, and you got to press it against the fence, and you got to be adjusting, and you got to be moving. And I think Volkanovski is capable of doing that for 15 minutes. No question. I think he can do it for 25, but knowing it's only for 15, I think that makes it, I don't want to say easier, but you don't have that concern of, oh my gosh, I need to pace myself a little bit here in this first round. And so that's what I think he's got to do. I don't think if he sets up at kickboxing range and tries to duke it out there that he'll be successful there. I think that plays into exactly what Aldo wants. I just think he has to understand, listen, His defense is fantastic. Don't get frustrated. Keep being relentless, moving forward. Keep reshooting. Keep making it dirty. Make it into an ugly type fight like that. And if he does that, I think he'll win.
And we mentioned the whole injury just before. I mean, how much of an X factor do you think Aldo's knee is here? Like, it's hard to tell with fighters. You know, they'll say something's not right, then everything's fine. Then after the fight, you find out, you know, that they only have one finger that works. So going into this one, I mean, Volkanovski needs to get a takedown, and Aldo may have a busted knee. Do you think this could be the X factor that gets him the win?
It definitely could be, man. You never know. Like you said, with any fighter, I feel like the Aldo camp's like notoriously kind of private about things like that as well. So
and the Volkanovski camp, he's never. Yeah. I think he only fought once in the UFC healthy.
That's true. It's true. You never know. I mean, I try not to put too much stock into that because, as you said, everybody's banged up, man. I've seen guys at gyms on crutches a week out of a fight, and the next thing you know, I'm like, why is he not pulling out of that fight? What is happening here? So nobody's ever 100%. I mean, Aldo can surprise here again. I think this is a very competitive fight. I just believe that, as Volkanovski says, man, I believe this is his time. All respect in the world to Aldo, one of the greatest featherweights of all time, one of the greatest fighters of all time. Doing it in Brazil is going to be an even greater challenge, but I just believe this is Volkanovski's moment to kind of step up to that next tier.
Man, if Volkanovski can get it done, if he can extend the streak, become a title contender, you got to think this would get him the next title shot. The things it would do for, the recent, I guess, success of Australasia, obviously Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya, shit, we're claiming him, and he trains with Israel Adesanya these days. It would be absolutely massive for Aussie MMA, but with Jose Aldo, he's been speaking a lot about going to boxing and sort of moving on from the UFC. He wants to fight out his contract by the end of the year. Do you think it really happens? I mean, this is something he's spoken about before, but at the same time, he's left that window open for, look, we're open to anything. We're open to negotiations. Do you think he's dangling boxing out there as a public negotiating tool to sort of say to the UFC, hey, I have other interests? Because at the moment, when he talks about getting a title shot in his final UFC fight, I mean, it seems like an absolute pipe dream.
Yeah, it's weird. He kind of goes back and forth on it, right? Like, one, I just want to fight out my contract, but then I also want to be champion. And, it's funny because, if you walk away as champion, I mean, if you did, let's say you retire and you wanted to go box, I'm sure the UFC would let you do that even if you were still under contract. But if you're a title holder, would they let you walk away from the title and go box? I don't think so. So it's kind of weird when you're balancing that out. You'd think if you really wanted to be free and clear, he'd want to stay away from the title and not have anything to do with that because then it complicates the contractual issue. But that said, I do believe Jose in this situation, man. I wouldn't say that he doesn't. I don't think he loves this. I mean, obviously he's done it for a long time, and it's his competitive nature is there. It's provided for him and his family. But I think I don't think he feels like some of these people that I got to be in the game. Aldo doesn't speak English, but from all the times that I've been around him and all the times I've been down in Brazil, I mean, I get the feeling that, all he really wants to do is just, walk around in flip-flops with his shirt off and play FIFA and, drink a coconut on the beach, man. I think that's the perfect life for Jose Aldo, right? So, yeah, I think he is. I think he'd like to box is almost just a challenge and it's almost something to stay fresh, you know what I mean, to kind of make it new again. So I don't think it's just a contractual discussion point, man. I think he really is ready to be done. But I just do caution. I do feel like he's a ways away from the featherweight title, but it does make me wonder, like, why in the hell would you want to win the featherweight title if you're trying to get away from the UFC?
Very interesting. But before we let you go, John, the main event, of course, has Jessica Andrade challenging Rose for the strawweight belt. Before we even talk about the matchup, what do you think about the UFC making this fight in Brazil and giving the challenger the hometown advantage? It's kind of rare that we see the champion going into enemy territory for a title defense, but even more so into Brazil, where there's been a billion controversies. It's so far away. It's like, if you go fight a Canadian in Canada, it's one deal. When you're flying to Brazil to fight a Brazilian and you're going up against that crowd, the judges, and everything in between, I mean, that's quite a big sort of difference.
It's a massive difference. And let's add one more caveat on top of that. It's Rose who's been dealing with kind of like mental issues and things of that nature. And I'm not trying to question her. I mean, I understand what she went through was devastating, and not just in this, the bus incident, but her whole life. I mean, she's admitted she's kind of fragile, I guess. But I mean, she's openly talked about it. You know what I mean? So like, for that champion of all champions to be the one that has to do this, like, Yeah, I was shocked. I was really, really shocked at the assignment, to be honest with you. But I think that just goes to show you how much, self-belief Rose does have at this point, and the people around her have at this point as well, that they believe that they can go down to Brazil, face all those things, as you said. I mean, once you get in the cage, I mean, you'll hear most fighters will tell you, I don't care how loud the crowd is. I can't hear the crowd anyway. All I can hear is my corner. And I believe that's true. But I can tell you, it is so loud down there. The crowd is just incredible. I mean, Aldo Mendez, too. I remember, there was a shot after the end of the first round that a lot of people said, oh, well, that changed the entire, course of the fight. Dude, I was cage side. You couldn't hear the bell, man. Nobody could. It was not dirty. Like, it was so loud you couldn't hear it. And the other thing that I always think about, too, is the loud chants, the Uvai Morer, all that. Like, yeah, you're right. You only hear your corner. But, what about when you're kind of rocked and you're wobbled and you're dazed a little bit and you're trying to get your senses about you, and all you can hear is those chants and that screaming and that volume, like, my God, it's got to be tough. And Andrade is going to be coming out trying to rock you. So, yeah, man, tough assignment. I was surprised it was announced. I think it's awesome. That they're having a women's title fight in Brazil. I think that's phenomenal. I think it's cool that Rose is doing this. It's a tough assignment, man. There is a lot stacked against her. But, gosh, she's such a great champion. You think about what she went through in those two Joanna fights, man. Just the psychological, mental battle and warfare that those fights were, in addition to what they were in the cage. I mean, I think she's prepped for it, but, man, it just seems like it brings a lot of X factors to the table. I
think stylistically it's a fascinating matchup because if you look at Rose's last two losses, it was against Carla Esparza, which feels like a million years ago, but she got out-grappled. And you got to think Andrade is, at this point, a better grappler than Carla Esparza. And then you look at the Karolina Kowalkiewicz loss where she got outstruck, whereas Andrade destroyed Karolina. But Joanna beat Andrade and Rose beat Joanna twice. So stylistically, it is a fascinating matchup. Who are you sort of leaning towards, and how do you see this fight potentially going, John?
Yeah, the MMA math is kind of bizarre in this one, right? But, listen, I will say, and I almost feel bad saying this because I feel like I'm doubting Rose when she's proved herself to us already twice, But I'm leaning towards Andrade in this for kind of some of the reasons you say. I think this might be a bad stylistic matchup for Rose. I mean, the one thing that does, I think if this gets done, it gets done on the ground for Rose, to be honest. I do not think Rose is going to outstrike Andrade. I might be wrong in thinking that. She is very technically precise, but, man, the power, the aggression of Andrade, I think that's a dangerous thing to play around with. I mean, Joanna can touch you up a couple times, and you can say, dang it, I got caught there. Now I got to move. No, Andrade, you do not want to get touched up a couple times. You make some mistakes, the fight's over. So I don't think she's going to want this to be a completely stand-up battle. And, of course, Andrade has those incredible takedowns, incredible power on the ground as well. But I think Rose is really, really slick on the ground. And I think Jessica's going to have to be cautious of that. I think she's going to be very aware of positioning, make sure she doesn't get caught in scrambles. To me, that's where I think Rose's best opportunities are going to be in transitional battles, in moving. I don't see her necessarily – Rose taking the fight down and dominating from top position. I don't see her outstriking over the course of 5 rounds. I think she's going to have to catch something in the transition. That's where I feel her best opportunity is. But I think it's a phenomenal fight. I think it's a close fight, but I'm leaning slightly towards Jessica Andrade in this one.
Wow. Well, let's just look at what's happening next. I mean, you got Tatiana Suarez facing off against Nina Ansaroff for UFC 238. Then there's also Michelle Waterson, who's you'd think a blockbuster superstar, and if UFC's trying to sort of push the division, she's a great sort of option to put up for a title shot because she's got so much of a following and you don't want her to lose and then miss out on that opportunity. So if Andrade is able to beat Rose, do you see one of them getting the next title shot? Or do you think the UFC takes the opportunity to put Joanna in a title rematch against Andrade?
No, I don't think that fight's deserved right now. I mean, if anything, you'd see if Rose, depending on how the fight went down. I think, look, you're right about Waterson. I mean, she gets clicks. She's a star. There's no question about it. But to me, you got to go with Tatiana. If Tatiana's victorious over Nina, I mean, what more can she do? I think she has future champ written all over her. I think that'd have to be the play. I mean, Waterson is always going to be involved in big matchups. She's definitely a superstar. But I think Tatiana's the real deal. I think she will hold UFC gold at some point.
All right, guys. Well, there you guys go. He's one of the good guys in the game, John Morgan. Follow him on Twitter, MMA Junkie, John Instagram, John Morgan MMA, and of course, MMAJunkie.com. And that is the end of this episode of Submission Radio. Big thank you to Aaron Bronsteter, Tommy Toehold, and John Morgan. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers listening to Submission Radio. Let's go Celtics, and we'll catch you guys next week.